The crash and the cold. The night was colder than anything Eli had ever felt in his life, and the wind howled through the broken rocks of the icy moon like a creature searching for something it had lost long ago, and maybe it would never find again. His small exploration shuttle had lost power during descent and crashed near the edge of a deep crater where jagged cliffs stood like frozen guards watching over an endless white plain, and now everything was silent except for the wind that refused to let go of the silence. Eli pulled his thermal jacket tight and checked the scanner again, hoping for some kind of shelter or even just a sign that he was not going to freeze alone and forgotten in this frozen place where even time seemed to stop and stare. The scanner blinked once, then twice, and showed a small heat signature not far from his location, and although it was weak and fading, it was the only thing nearby that gave him a reason to keep moving through the snow and ice that cracked under every step. His boots sank into the soft powder, and his breath came out in long trails of fog as he moved toward the signal. His body, already numb from the cold that slipped through even the best tech his suit had, and his fingers stiff from gripping the scanner too tight, the shape came into view, slowly covered in a blanket of snow and half buried near a patch of shattered rock. And when he brushed the snow away, he found something he did not expect. Not a rock or a broken drone. A small alien pod still humming with faint energy. The metal was curved and smooth with strange, glowing lines that pulsed like a heartbeat, and the hatch had been blown open as if it had crash-landed hard, and whoever was inside had not left by choice. And something about it made Eli pause, not in fear, but in a strange, quiet respect. Moved closer and looked inside, expecting to find nothing but the cold and maybe some ruined tech, but instead he saw her lying there, silent and still, with skin that shimmered like moonlight and eyes that flickered faintly behind closed lids, as if caught in a dream that refused to end. She looked human almost, but not fully. Her features softer, her body thinner, her limbs longer, and her hair like strands of starlight drifting over her shoulders, and something about her made him forget the cold for a moment, as if the world had paused to watch what he would do next. She was breathing, but barely, and her body trembled in the cold, as if even her alien biology could not fight the harshness of this moon forever. And Eli knew that if he left her here, she would die, and if he stayed, he might not last the night either. But something inside him refused to walk away, and so he reached down and lifted her, gently cradling her weight against his chest as he stumbled back toward a small rock shelter he had seen earlier, one that blocked some of the wind and offered a little protection from the cold. He set her down inside and unzipped his sleeping bag, laying it open wide before he placed her carefully inside, and then, without thinking too long, he slid in beside her, letting the bag close around them both as his body began to share what warmth it had left. Her skin felt cold at first, like touching ice, but slowly it began to warm, and he felt her breathing become steadier, her body relaxing as the heat wrapped around her. And for a while, they simply lay there, two strangers from different worlds, bound by the need to survive. Eli stared at the roof of the small shelter, listening to the wind outside, and wondering what kind of life she had come from, and what her people would think if they saw her now sharing warmth with a human on a lonely moon where no one was supposed to be. She shifted slightly, and her head rested near his shoulder, her eyes still closed, but her body no longer shaking, and he noticed a faint sound like a whisper or a hum coming from her chest, as if her body was reacting to his presence in a way he could not yet understand. He thought about all the training he had received, about alien contact, all the rules, all the warnings about trust and fear and the unknown, but none of that mattered here in this moment, where only survival and a simple act of kindness had any meaning at all. Maybe tomorrow they would figure out who she was and what she wanted. Maybe tomorrow they would talk or fight or run or make plans to get off this moon, but tonight there was only the sleeping bag, the cold wind outside, and the quiet warmth between two lives that had touched for the first time. Eli closed his eyes and let sleep come slowly as her breathing matched his, and the ice around their small shelter cracked quietly in the dark, as if the moon itself was watching. and waiting for what would come next from the choice he had made with no words and no promises, only trust. And somewhere deep inside, her something had changed, something old, something hidden now, waking for the first time as she lay beside the one who had offered warmth without demand and safety, without question, and in the silence between them, a new path was beginning without either of them knowing where it would lead. Strange connections. Morning arrived slowly on the frozen moon with pale light spreading across the ice like a soft breath, and the wind finally quiet as if it too needed rest after a long night of howling through rocks and snow without end. Eli opened his eyes slowly, still wrapped in the sleeping bag, still holding the alien girl close, as if part of him feared she would vanish if he let go, and for a moment he just listened to her breathing, steady and calm like waves brushing against a quiet shore. Her body was warmer now, her skin less pale, and her chest rising with slow rhythm, and he could see small movements under her eyelids like dreams chasing each other across her mind, and he wondered what kind of world she came from and what those dreams might show. She stirred gently, her arm brushing against his chest, and her eyes opened with a soft glow like distant stars blinking awake, and for a long moment she simply looked at him, her expression unreadable but not cold, not afraid. More like she was trying to understand why he had stayed. Eli offered a small smile and raised his hand slowly, pointing at himself, then saying his name clearly and gently, hoping she might repeat it, or give him hers, or at least recognize the attempt to build something that wasn't just survival. She watched him quietly, then placed her hand on her own chest and spoke a single sound, not a name, any earth language, but something soft and melodic like a wind chime lost in a forest. And Eli nodded, repeating it clumsily, and she smiled for the first time, a tiny spark of light on her lips. Their shared space inside the rock shelter felt less cold now, and Eli reached into his pack, pulling out one of his ration bars, unwrapping it carefully and offering it to her with both hands, showing that it was safe, showing that he meant no harm. She took it slowly, turning it in her fingers, sniffing it lightly before tasting a small corner, and her eyes widened as if she had never known this kind of flavor, or maybe just never expected a human to share it without condition. They ate together in silence, and as the warmth returned to their bodies, a quiet connection began to grow, not through words or tools, but through simple actions, small signs that trust was forming, like ice melting under gentle sun. She pointed at his scanner, blinking quietly in the corner, and tilted her head in question, and Eli picked it up, showing her the display, explaining with motions how it worked, how it searched for life, how it had helped him find her in the storm. Her fingers touched the screen carefully, and it reacted to her presence, flashing strange colors for a second before returning to normal, and Eli watched as she pulled away, confused or surprised, and maybe even a little alarmed by the reaction. He placed his hand over hers gently, calming her, showing her it was fine, that no harm had come, and she relaxed, slowly watching him with eyes that now held a flicker of something deeper than curiosity, something that might be the start of understanding. They spent the day like that, exchanging small gestures, learning shapes in the snow, drawing in the frost with fingers, telling simple stories through signs and looks, and Eli felt less alone for the first time since the crash, as if the silence of the moon had finally been broken. When night returned, the wind picked up again, colder and louder than before, and the temperature dropped quickly, forcing them back into the sleeping bag without delay, and this time she moved closer without hesitation, her body folding into his like two pieces of a puzzle long separated. Eli felt something change as their bodies touched again, not just warmth, but something electric flowing through his skin into his bones, into his thoughts, as if her presence was awakening parts of him he never knew existed, and his mind filled with images that were not his own. He saw flashes of her world, tall towers of crystal glowing rivers, skies filled with shifting lights, and strange creatures that floated instead of walked, and he saw her standing alone on a platform looking at the stars, as if searching for something she had lost. The visions faded as quickly as they came, leaving behind a strange echo like a memory half remembered, and when he looked at her, she was already watching him, her hand on his chest, as if she had felt it too, and maybe she had shared something without meaning to. He tried to speak, tried to ask what it meant, but words failed him, and she only shook her head, gently placing her fingers over his lips, then closing her eyes again, and Eli followed, letting sleep take him slowly as the cold wind howled just beyond the rocks. The next morning he woke earlier and felt stronger, more alert, as if his body had healed overnight more than it should have, and when he moved, there was less pain in his joints, less tightness in his muscles, and even his breathing felt smoother than the day before. She was already awake, sitting just outside the shelter, watching the sky with calm focus, her body still, but her eyes full of thought, and when Eli stepped beside her, she turned and touched his forehead gently, as if checking for something unseen. He felt a warm pulse spread through his chest, and she nodded once quietly, then pointed to herself, then to him, then tapped her temples, slowly, like she was trying to explain something important, something about connection or energy, or maybe even thought. Eli understood just a little, maybe enough to realize they were no longer just two survivors sharing warmth, but two minds beginning to link in ways no human had experienced before, and he wondered what this meant for her, for him, for everything beyond this icy moon. She reached into the snow, drawing two small circles, one for each of them, then a line connecting them, and beneath it, she drew another shape, strange and swirling like a star, falling sideways, and when she looked up, her face was serious. Not afraid, but firmly stared at the drawing, feeling a chill not from the wind, but from something deeper, like a thread pulling at the edge of his thoughts, and he nodded slowly, unsure of the meaning, but knowing one thing for certain: whatever had started in that sleeping bag was no longer simple. They were changing, both of them, not just in body, but in spirit, and neither of them knew how far this connection would go or what it would bring, but neither pulled away, and in that silent agreement, a new story had already begun to form between them. The shift begins. The sky above the frozen moon remained pale and still, as if it too was waiting for what would come next, and inside the rocky shelter, Eli sat with his back against the wall, watching the alien girl move quietly across the snow, her steps light and graceful, like a dancer made of ice and starlight. Her eyes scanned the horizon with focus and calm, as if she sensed something out there, something not yet seen, and Eli could not stop thinking about the strange connection that had started between them, something real, something deeper than words or touch, something that kept growing stronger with every hour. His body felt different, his hands steadier, his thoughts sharper, and when he looked at her, he felt a soft pulse in his chest, not like a heartbeat, but like a signal, like two stars blinking at each other across the void. And finding rhythm, she returned to the shelter and sat beside him, her breath warm on the air, and her hands glowing faintly with light that pulsed with each movement, as if her body was waking up from a long sleep and beginning to share something new with the world around her. Relay opened his scanner again and checked his vitals. The numbers on the screen surprised him: heart rate improved, oxygen levels stable, muscle recovery higher than expected, and a small warning blinked near the edge of the screen. Biological shift detected, and he stared at it, wondering what it meant. He turned the scanner toward her, and the screen flashed with strange symbols, unfamiliar readings, unlike anything the device had recorded before. And when she looked at it, her face changed, not in fear, but in recognition, as if she understood the change better than he did. She reached forward, slowly placed her fingers over the scanner, then over his chest, then over her own heart, and closed her eyes. And in that moment, Eli felt a surge of energy, not painful, not overwhelming, just a soft wave passing through his body like sunlight through water. Memories that were not his filled his mind, cities made of glass, voices speaking through light, trees that sang when the wind touched them, and a long journey across stars to reach places untouched by her people, and one mission: find the humans and decide what must be done. He saw her standing before others, her face hidden behind a mask, her voice calm as she spoke of danger, of conflict, of fear, that humans would destroy more than they built, and she was sent to see with her own eyes, to confirm if humans were truly a threat. But now everything was different, and the sleeping bag, the warmth, the kindness had broken something inside her, or maybe had awakened something, and she no longer saw Eli as a threat, but as a bridge, as a beginning of something unknown. She opened her eyes slowly, and her expression was clear. Now she was no longer just a visitor, no longer just a scout. She was something else, something more. And Eli understood that their connection had grown into something even her people had not prepared her for. The sky above began to shift, light bending in strange ways, clouds forming lines across the sky like a signal being sent. And she looked up sharply, her body tensing, and her hands forming shapes in the air that glowed and faded like fading stardust. She turned to Eli and pointed upward, then to her pod, then made a gesture like a door opening and closing, and he understood. Someone was coming, someone not friendly, not safe, and they had been found too soon. Eli stood, grabbed his gear, and helped her gather what they had left. Not much, just a few supplies, the scanner and the sleeping bag that had started everything, and together they moved quickly through the snow toward a narrow canyon where the wind was softer and the rocks taller. She moved with speed, her body no longer weak, no longer shaking, and Eli could feel strength in his own steps, like his legs carried more power, like the connection between them had given him part of her and taken part of him in return. They reached the canyon and found a small cave near the back, hidden behind frozen vines and sharp stones, and as they entered she placed her hand on the wall and whispered a sound that echoed softly, and the stone shimmered like water before becoming solid again. Eli watched in silence as she turned and looked at him, her face calm but her eyes burning with a fire he had not seen before, and she pointed at the sky, then at her chest, then at his, and drew a circle in the air around them. She was trying to tell him something important, and he listened closely as she formed more symbols with her hands, her fingers painting words into the air, and Eli watched and tried to understand, tried to feel the meaning, not just see other people were near. They had picked up the beacon from the pod, and they were coming to retrieve her. And if they found her bonded with a human, they would see it as failure, as betrayal, and she would not be taken home. She would be erased, reprogrammed, or worse. She looked at him and touched his forehead, then her own, and then her chest, and his again, and the meaning was clear now. Their bond was growing, not just physical, not just mental, but something rare, something powerful, something ancient among her kind. Sat down slowly, thinking of what to do, thinking of how everything had changed so quickly, and how he had gone from a stranded scout to a carrier of something far greater than a signal or a mission, something that could change two worlds with one single act. She sat beside him and leaned into his shoulder, her warmth familiar, now her presence no longer alien, and for a while they said nothing, just listened to the wind outside and the sound of their hearts beating, not in fear but in quiet hope. The stars above began to shift, and Eli knew they had only a short time left before the others arrived, and choices would have to be made. Hard choices that could not be undone, but he also knew that he would not let her go, not now, not after everything they had shared. She reached for his hand and he took it without question, and their fingers laced together, not like strangers, not like allies, but like something, older, something forgotten now returning, and the world around them seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would happen. Next the others arrived. The cave wall stood silent, and the air inside was still heavy with cold and quiet, and Eli sat with his back against the stone, holding the scanner tightly in his hand, watching as its screen flashed again and again, showing signals that were getting stronger with each passing moment outside. The sky had changed its colors, now swirled in patterns not seen before, light bending like waves moving across deep water, and in those shifting clouds were shapes long and thin with glowing trails, moving fast across the sky without sound but full of warning. She stood at the edge of the cave, her eyes fixed on the sky, her fingers glowing faintly as they traced symbols in the air and the ground beneath. Her feet pulsed gently as if the moon itself was responding to her presence. Eli moved closer, not asking questions, because now he knew that words were no longer needed between them, and he watched as she turned to him, her face calm, but her eyes sharp as fire, and she raised her hand pointing upward, then placed it Over her heart, she was trying to prepare him not with fear, but with truth, and he understood that the moment was near, the moment when her people would land, when the decision would be made, and everything would change again, and maybe not in ways they could control. The scanner beeped loud now, no longer calm, its warning red and fast, showing 3 large energy readings approaching from above, and then another smaller one moving slower from the west. Eli knew they had minutes, not hours, and every second mattered. She stepped forward, her hands moving through the air faster than before, drawing shapes that glowed bright, then faded, as if she was forming a shield or a message, or maybe something older, something passed down in her memory from a time long before her birth. Eli felt the air thicken around them, as if energy was building, and his skin tingled like static was crawling across him, and he saw the way her eyes changed, now glowing stronger than ever, her body no longer weak or lost, but full of purpose. First ship landed near the crater where her pod had fallen, its body long and silver with sharp wings that cut through the snow and dust, and 3 figures stepped out, tall and silent, covered in smooth armor, with eyes that burned like stars and hands that held no weapons, but no mercy either. She stepped forward out of the cave, walking slowly, but without fear, her hands open and empty, and her head held high like a leader, not a scout, and the wind moved around her like it knew not to stand in her way. Eli stayed behind for a moment, watching her figure move across the ice, and he felt something rise in his chest, not fear, not worry, but something stronger, like respect or awe, because he saw not an alien girl now, but someone who had chosen a path that could not be undone. The figures moved to meet her, and their heads tilted as they scanned her body, as they saw the marks of change and the light in her hands, and one of them stepped closer, placing a device on her chest, and it blinked yellow, then turned black, and she did not flinch. They spoke in a language Eli could not hear, not with sound, but with pulses in the air that made the ice crack gently, and the wind shift, and she answered with movements slow and clear, using the symbols he had seen before, and then she pointed back toward the cave. 3 figures turned, and their eyes locked on Eli, who now stood in the cave entrance, not moving, not afraid, but ready, and the air between them buzzed with something heavy, something old, something powerful, and one of them stepped forward, lifting its hand slowly, but before anything could happen, she stepped between them, her body a wall, her arms spread wide, and her voice loud and clear. A sound like thunder rolled through the sky, and the figures stopped, their heads tilting in confusion or surprise. She turned and pointed at Eli, then placed her hand on her chest, then his, then made the old circle in the air again, the bond, the symbol of connection, and her voice rose again, not angry, not broken, but full of strength and choice. Figures stood silent for a long moment, and the snow began to fall again, soft and slow, covering the land in quiet. And then one of them stepped forward, placed something on the ground, and it unfolded into a glowing ring of light. A message appeared above it, made of symbols and stars, and Eli watched as she read it, her face calm, then still, then sad, and finally strong again, and she turned to him and nodded once slowly, and he understood that this was the moment of choice. She was given 2 paths: return with them and be taken back for correction, for reprogramming, for removal of all human contact, or stay here with Eli on this moon and be cast out, cut from her people, marked as other, no longer part of the whole. She did not speak, she only walked to Eli and stood beside him, her hand finding his without hesitation, and her fingers laced through his. And the 3 figures watched without moving, and the ring of light closed with a soft hum like a scythe. The figures turned without words and walked back to their ship, the wind pushing against them, but never slowing them down, and the ship rose into the sky like a silver ghost, leaving behind no sound, no trail, only silence and sky. She and Eli stood there watching the light fade from the clouds, and for a long time they did not move, because something had ended and something else had begun, and both of them knew that nothing would ever be the same again. She turned to him, slowly placed her hand on his chest and her other hand over her own, and then touched her forehead to his, and in that moment he saw again the towers of light, the rivers Of stars, the trees that sang, and the dream that was now real. Eli took her hand and they walked back into the cave, not as strangers, not as survivor and scout, but as something new, something never written before, and the snow fell gently behind them. As the sky above returned to quiet, one shared future, the sky above the icy moon was calm again, without strange colors or distant shadows, and the air felt lighter, as if the world had released a deep breath it had held for too long. And inside the cave, Eli sat beside her, not speaking, not thinking, only feeling the silence around them slowly grow warm. Time moved differently, now like it had slowed down to match their heartbeats, and the glow in her hands was softer, now not fading, but calmer, like a fire that no longer needed to burn high to stay alive. And Eli watched her face, wondering what she felt now that her people had gone. She touched the cave wall, and it responded with a quiet shimmer, a pulse of light that faded into the stone. And he saw her close her eyes, like she was saying goodbye to something, or maybe giving thanks, and then she turned to him, her expression clear and steady, without fear or doubt. They stood and walked together out of the cave, their steps quiet on the snow and their hands still joined. And as they reached the ridge above the crater, Eli looked out across the frozen land and saw something that made him stop and blink against the light. A small human rescue ship was landing near the wreckage of his old shuttle, its engines humming low and steady, and he felt a sudden rush of emotion, not just relief, but wonder, because somehow Earth had found him and come for him. Even after all this time, she looked at the ship with silent curiosity, her head tilting slightly as if trying to read its shape, its energy, its purpose. And Eli placed a hand gently on her arm, telling her without words that it was safe, that it was home. Ship's ramp lowered, and 3 humans stepped out wearing thick suits and carrying scanning gear and weapons, but their postures were relaxed, more cautious than aggressive, and one of them raised a hand in greeting the way explorers always did when meeting the unknown. Eli raised his arm in return and walked forward slowly, keeping his pace, even so she could walk beside him without fear. And as they moved across the snow toward the rescue team, he felt her grip tighten slightly, not from panic, but from awareness of the moment's weight. The team stopped a short distance away and stared not at Eli but at her, their faces full of confusion and surprise. And one of them stepped forward, asking for identification and medical status, and Eli answered calmly, saying his name, his mission, and that he was not alone. He explained as simply as he could how he had survived, how he had found her, and how something had happened between them. Something no machine or chart could explain, and he watched as the team exchanged glances, trying to understand what this meant. The team leader stepped closer and scanned both of them, the scanner blinking and buzzing, and then falling silent as if confused by the readings. And the leader looked up slowly and asked if she was a threat, and Eli shook his head, saying, "Clearly she saved my life." She stepped forward then, without waiting, and raised her hands slowly, showing that they were empty and full of light, and her eyes met the leader's without blinking, and for a long moment no one moved. And then the leader lowered his scanner and nodded once. They were brought onto the ship quietly and without force, and given space to rest and recover. And as the engines lifted them from the moon's surface, Eli looked through the window and watched the ground fall away, and he felt something deep inside begin to settle. She sat beside him, watching the stars grow brighter as they rose, and he saw a small smile touch her lips, not wide, not loud, but soft and full of thought. And he knew she understood that this was not the end, but the beginning of something new. When they reached the main station orbiting above the moon, the officials came with questions and rules and fears, but they also came with wonder, because the scans told them a truth they could not deny. Her body had changed his, and his mind had touched hers, and no one could explain how. Scientists gathered around them, not to lock them away, but to learn to ask and listen and study, not with cold machines, but with careful eyes and open hands. And slowly over time, people began to accept what had happened, even if they did not fully understand. Her name became a symbol, not just in books or files, but in whispers across ships and stations. And her story was told again and again, how she came as a scout ready to judge, and how she stayed because of a single act of kindness on a night too cold to survive alone. Ely became part of something larger, not because he fought or conquered, but because he shared a sleeping bag, because he chose to protect instead of fear, because he listened instead of running, and that choice echoed through history in ways he never imagined. They lived together not as study and subject, but as partners exploring new worlds, building bridges between people who once saw each other as only strange or dangerous, and their bond became a guide for others who believed in something more than just survival. Many years passed, and the memory of that icy moon reigned clear in both their minds, the place where two lives touched and changed, and every year on the same date they would sit together in silence and remember not the cold, not the danger, but the warmth that started everything. Their connection grew not through machines or data, but through time and trust, and even when new voices joined them, children, friends, explorers from different stars, the core remained the same: one sleeping bag, one choice, one moment that opened a future no one had planned. And as the stars turned above them again and again, Ela looked at her, and she looked at him, and in their eyes was the quiet truth that sometimes the smallest act, the simplest gesture, can change everything, not with power or fear, but with something as basic as warmth. The end.